At my husband's funeral, my best friend stood up with a DNA report in one hand and a little boy on her hip. She waited until the pastor sat down. Then she said clear enough for the whole room to hear, "I think everyone deserves the truth." The room went still. She was wearing black, but not grief. Black heels. Black dress cut too sharp for a church. The little boy looked tired and confused. He held a toy truck against her shoulder. Then she looked at me. Not sad, not ashamed, pleased. "We were together for 3 years, she said. She lifted the paper slightly. "This is his son." A few people gasped. No one moved. Then she smiled, small and mean. "Such an old, useless, infertile maid," she said. The word infertile landed harder than widow. She knew exactly where to place the knife. "I'm here for what belongs to my child," she continued. "Half of the $900,000 insurance policy. And the lake house." Then she held up another paper. A signed will. Every face in that funeral home turned toward me. My husband's cousins. Our pastor. The women from church who had brought casseroles for 3 straight days. My own hands were folded in my lap. I looked at the little boy first, then at the papers, then at her, and I started laughing. Not loudly, not wildly, just enough to make people uncomfortable, because she had missed one thing. Now let me take you back. My name is Evelyn. I was married to Daniel for 15 years. We lived in a lakeside town in Michigan where people notice everything and say very little directly, the kind of place with tidy mailboxes, church newsletters, and women who remember what casserole you brought after a surgery. Daniel was the kind of man people trusted easily. He had a good voice, warm handshake, steady smile. He sold commercial insurance for small businesses and made people feel safe even when he was only moving numbers around. We had a decent life, not flashy. A brick colonial on a quiet street. A retirement account. A lake house his grandfather bought in the 70s. We hosted barbecues in the summer. Christmas brunch every year. People said we were lucky. For a long time I thought so too. We never had children. That fact lived in our marriage like a third person who knew when to stay quiet. We tried in the beginning. Doctors. Tests. Hope measured in calendar days. Then disappointment. Then more tests. At some point, Daniel held my hand in a parking lot after an appointment and said, "It doesn't matter. We have each other." I wanted to believe him. So I did. My best friend Marissa was there through all of it. That's the line that still catches in my throat. She had been in my life since college, back when we shared grocery money and borrowed interview clothes from each other. She was funny in a bright, dangerous way. The kind of woman who could turn a boring room into a room that watched her. Marissa never married. She dated men who liked her confidence until it cost them something. Then they called her difficult. She used to joke that I got the good husband. At the time, I thought it was affection. I hear it differently now. She came to our house often. Holidays, birthdays, long weekends at the lake house. Daniel grilled burgers while Marissa made drinks and told stories. If I was running behind, she'd set the table without asking. If Daniel and I argued, she would say, "You two are the most stable couple I know." That was the thing about betrayal. It prefers familiar furniture. You don't see it because it's already in the room. The last 3 years of Daniel's life were difficult in ordinary ways. Work stress. His father got sick. Then my mother's knee surgery, bills, roof repairs, a leaking pipe at the lake house. Nothing dramatic. That's how deception survives. Inside normal life. Daniel was home less. Not absent enough to alarm me. Just shifted. More late client dinners. More one quick stop at the office. More weekends where he said he needed to check on the lake place alone. Marissa stayed close during those years too. Closer, if I'm honest. She called more, stopped by more, brought soup when I had the flu, sat beside me in church and squeezed my hand when the pastor talked about unanswered prayers. Sometimes I wondered if she pitied me. Women know when they are being looked at softly. I thought that was what I felt. I was wrong. The morning Daniel died began like any other Tuesday. He left early, kissed my forehead, forgot his travel mug, then came back for it. That small detail still haunts me, because ordinary men do ordinary things right before they disappear forever. The accident happened on the highway in sleet. 3-car collision. A jackknifed delivery truck. He never made it to the hospital. The state trooper who came to my door was younger than my nephew. He kept his hat in both hands. I remember that because I kept staring at his fingers and not listening. After that, everything became casseroles and paperwork. Condolences, insurance calls, funeral home carpeting. Marissa stepped in immediately. She handled flowers, guest lists, a printed photo board for the visitation. She stood in my kitchen with my church friends and said, "Let me take care of her." Again, I hear that differently now. 3 days later at the funeral, she arrived late. Not too late, just late enough to be noticed. The boy was with her. I had never seen him before, maybe 4. Brown hair. Daniel's chin. I thought for one terrible second. Then I hated myself for thinking it. Children make everyone kinder. That was her strategy. Even then I could see it. She sat in the back until the service ended. Then she stood and changed the entire room. When she said infertile, I saw 3 women glance down immediately. Not at me. At their purses. At their shoes. Anywhere but my face. That word embarrasses other people more than you'd expect. It makes them feel like they're witnessing something indecent. She counted on that too. She had papers, a child, a performance. And for a few seconds the room belonged to her. Until I laughed. Because hidden in my handbag, tucked inside an old manila envelope I had carried for over a decade, and never once shown another living soul, was the one thing that made her entire little theater collapse. And Daniel, for all his lies, had never known I kept it. The laughter stopped quickly. It always does at funerals. People looked at me the way people look at someone who might be losing control. Not cruelly, just cautiously. Marissa's smile tightened. She had expected tears, or shouting, or denial. Laughter didn't fit the script she had rehearsed. "You think this is funny?" she asked. Her voice had sharpened. The little boy shifted against her hip and buried his face in her shoulder. I didn't answer. I stood slowly. The wooden pew creaked under the movement. Funeral homes are built for quiet grief, not confrontations. Our pastor cleared his throat but didn't interrupt. He knew the room had moved somewhere beyond ceremony. Marissa held the papers higher. "You can laugh all you want," she said. "This is still the truth." She shook the DNA report slightly. "And this," she added, lifting the second page, "is Daniel's will." I noticed something small then. Her hand was trembling. Not much. Just enough to see if you were looking carefully. Fear hides in fingers. The room stayed silent. Daniel's cousin Mark leaned against the wall near the door. My neighbor from across the lake crossed her arms slowly. Someone's phone vibrated and then went still. I looked at the boy again. He was watching the floor now. His toy truck rested against his cheek. Children have an instinct for adult tension. They know when the air changes. Marissa followed my gaze. "He deserves what's his," she said quickly. Her tone softened for the child, but when she looked back at me, the edge returned. "You knew Daniel wanted a family." The word family hung between us. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I looked at the closed casket at the front of the room. Daniel's photograph stood beside it. Taken 5 years earlier at the lake house. He was standing on the dock, squinting into the sun. That easy smile again. People often choose photographs from the years before everything gets complicated. Marissa mistook my silence for weakness. She took a step forward. "You should have told people the truth a long time ago," she said, "about why you never had children." A murmur moved through the room. Not loud, just the small shifting sound of people absorbing gossip. She turned slightly so the others could see the boy's face. "This is Daniel's son." Her voice softened again. His only child. That word again. Only strategic. I noticed my wedding ring then, still on my finger. I turned it once with my thumb. Metal against skin. Familiar. Marissa saw the movement. Her expression brightened. "You don't have to hold on to the fantasy anymore," she said. "He loved me." A few people shifted uncomfortably. One of Daniel's aunts looked down at her lap. Public cruelty makes witnesses restless. But Marissa had momentum now, and he left instructions. She continued. She tapped the page again, half the insurance, the lake house, for his son. She smiled then, a victory smile. That was when I spoke, quietly. "Marissa." My voice carried farther than I expected. She blinked. The room leaned in without realizing it. "You've always been dramatic," I said. The corner of her mouth twitched. "You're still denying it." "No." I shook my head slightly. "I'm remembering something." Her confidence returned instantly. "Oh, please, do you remember the winter Daniel had that accident?" The question landed oddly. People frowned. They were expecting anger, not nostalgia. Marissa hesitated. "Yes," she said. "He slipped on the ice behind the office building." "That's right." I nodded slowly. "He was in the hospital for 2 weeks." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I visited him every day." "Yes," I said, "you did." Silence stretched. The boy had started rolling the toy truck against Marissa's sleeve, back and forth, back and forth. Marissa lifted her chin. "What does that have to do with anything?" I reached into my handbag, the same handbag I had carried to the hospital 13 years ago. The zipper opened softly. Inside was the manila envelope. Old, edges worn smooth by time. I held it for a moment. The room watched. Curiosity had replaced shock. Marissa shifted her weight. "You think paperwork changes biology?" Her confidence was returning. Paper always looks weak next to emotion. I slid the document halfway out. "Daniel didn't know I kept this," I said. "Kept what?" The impatience in her voice had grown. I looked at her carefully. "You really believed him?" She frowned. "Believed what? That the problem was me?" The room stilled again. Somewhere in the back row, someone inhaled sharply. Marissa's smile faltered. "Only slightly." "I saw the doctors with you," she said quickly. "You cried." "Yes, I remember." I pulled the paper free now. A medical report, hospital letterhead, clear black print. I held it gently between 2 fingers. "You were there," I said. "But you didn't hear everything." Marissa stared at the page, then at me. "You're stalling." "No." I tilted the paper slightly so she could see the heading. Male Infertility Evaluation. Her expression froze, just for a moment. A tiny crack. "That's not—" But she stopped herself. Her eyes moved across the page, reading, trying to understand. The room had gone completely silent now. No murmurs, no shifting chairs, just the quiet rustle of paper as I held it. "After the accident," I said calmly, "Daniel couldn't have children." The boy's toy truck fell from Marissa's hand, plastic against carpet, a small sound. But it echoed like thunder. Marissa's face drained slowly of color. Marissa didn't speak for a few seconds, the kind of silence where a person's mind is moving faster than their face can follow. Her eyes moved from the envelope to me, then to the casket, then back again. "That's not possible," she said again, but softer. Her voice had lost the edge. It sounded thinner now. The boy bent down to pick up his truck. He rolled it across the carpet again, unaware that the ground beneath the adults had shifted. I slid the medical report back into the envelope. Carefully. The same way I had put it away 13 years earlier. "You're lying," Marissa said. It wasn't a shout. It was a wish. "I wish I was," I replied. A ripple moved through the room. Not loud, just the collective breath of people recalculating what they thought they knew. Daniel's cousin Mark stepped forward slightly. "What exactly does that report say?" he asked. His tone was cautious, neutral. He was the kind of man who liked facts before conclusions. I handed him the envelope. He took it without ceremony, pulled the paper free, read. His eyebrows moved first. Then his mouth tightened. He looked up slowly. "When was this done?" he asked. 13 years ago, I said. 2 weeks after Daniel's accident. Mark nodded once. Then he handed the report to Tom Richards, Daniel's business partner. Tom read more slowly, the way older men read things that might change a room. Marissa watched the paper move from hand to hand. Her breathing had changed. Faster. "Shallow. You're twisting something," she said suddenly. Her voice rose again, searching for ground. "Infertility tests fail all the time." I didn't answer. Tom finished reading and passed the report back to Mark. "Looks pretty clear," Tom said quietly. Marissa shook her head hard. "No, that can't be right." Her eyes snapped to me again. "You told him that. What, that he couldn't have children? Why would I do that to control him?" The accusation landed weakly. People could hear the desperation underneath it now. I folded my hands again. "He never saw that report," I said. Marissa blinked. What I never told him. The room leaned forward again. Even the pastor had stepped closer now. Why not someone asked from the back? I looked down at my wedding ring, then back up, because he was already ashamed. The truth moved slowly through the room. Some people understood immediately, others took a second. Daniel had believed the infertility was mine. All those years. Marissa's mouth opened slightly. "You're lying," she whispered again. "If I were lying," I said calmly, "he would have known." Her eyes flickered, searching, rebuilding. "I have a DNA test," she said suddenly. She lifted the paper again. "This proves he's the father." Mark reached out. "May I see that?" She hesitated, then handed it over. Confidence had begun to leak out of her posture. Mark scanned the page. His expression changed almost immediately. What Marissa demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he handed the page to Tom. Tom read, then turned the paper sideways, then back again. "This test says the child shares DNA with Daniel," he said slowly. "Yes," Marissa said quickly. "Exactly." Tom frowned. "It also says the sample was provided by the mother." Her eyes widened. "That's how these tests work." "Yes," Tom said. "But this one isn't court certified." The room shifted again. Marissa's lips parted. "That doesn't matter. It matters if money is involved." Her voice rose sharply. "You're all just protecting her." I tilted my head slightly. "No one needs to protect me." The boy tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," he whispered. She ignored him. "This is his son," she insisted. "Daniel told me himself." I watched her carefully. "You trusted him." Her eyes flashed. "He loved me." The words sounded rehearsed. I nodded slowly. "He told you I couldn't give him a family." She froze. A flicker of realization crossed her face. "He said you refused treatment," she said quietly. "Yes. He said you were the one who didn't want children." I looked around the room. Faces everywhere. People who had eaten in my kitchen, swum in our lake, watched us build a life. He said many things I said softly. Marissa's voice dropped. "You're saying he lied. I'm saying he protected himself." The boy had started rolling the truck again, back and forth across the carpet. A quiet, mechanical sound. Marissa stared at the floor for a long moment. Her shoulders moved slightly, then she lifted her head again. But the certainty was gone. "He promised us the lake house," she said. "Did he?" "Yes." "And the insurance?" "Yes." "Did you see those documents signed?" She held up the page again. "This will." Mark took it from her. He scanned the signature line, then handed it to Tom. Tom studied it longer this time. Then he sighed. "That's Daniel's handwriting," he said. Marissa's shoulders lifted in relief. But he continued, "This isn't witnessed." The room shifted again. "That's not necessary," she said quickly. "For something like this, it is." Tom handed the paper back. "Otherwise, it's just a note." Marissa stared at the page. Her hands began to shake again. "But he promised." I watched her carefully. For the first time since she had stood up in the funeral home, she looked small. Not dangerous, just cornered. "You destroyed our friendship for a promise," I said quietly. Her eyes snapped to mine. "And now you're discovering something important." What I held her gaze. "He lied to you too." The boy looked up then, confused. His small voice cut through the room. Mom Marissa didn't answer. She was staring at the envelope in my hands, and realizing the future she had announced to the room had just disappeared. No one spoke for a moment, the kind of silence that doesn't belong in a funeral home but settles there anyway. Marissa stood in the aisle with the boy on her hip. Her shoulders had lowered. The sharpness in her posture was gone. The will she had held up like a trophy now hung loosely in her hand. I watched her carefully, not with triumph, just observation. The pastor shifted his weight near the podium but didn't interrupt. He understood that whatever this was, it had to finish itself. Marissa looked at the casket again, then back at me. "You're twisting everything," she said quietly. The confidence had drained out of her voice. "Am I?" She swallowed. "You're saying Daniel lied to both of us. I'm saying Daniel told each of us the story that served him best." Her jaw tightened. "That's convenient. For him," I said. She glanced down at the boy again. He was rubbing his eyes now. The truck had stopped moving. Children get tired when adults take too long to finish their arguments. Mark stepped closer. "The medical report is pretty clear," he said gently. "That doesn't mean this child doesn't have a father." Marissa's eyes flashed. "He does. Just not Daniel," Mark said. She shook her head hard. "No." Her voice cracked. "He said he couldn't leave Evelyn yet." A small murmur moved through the room. That sentence explained more than she intended. He said the timing wasn't right. Her grip on the boy tightened. But he promised. Promises. Daniel had been good with those. I felt the old ache rise in my chest. Not anger, recognition. "Marissa," I said quietly. She looked at me again. "You didn't just betray me." Her face hardened slightly. "You betrayed yourself. That landed harder than I expected." Her mouth opened, closed. The room watched. Not cruelly, but with the attention people give a truth they didn't expect to witness. "You were jealous," I continued. The word slipped into the room like a stone dropped in water. "I wasn't jealous." "You were." Her chin lifted. "You had everything." "No," I said softly. "I had a marriage." She laughed once. Sharp. "And you think that's different?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because marriages can survive honesty." Her eyes flickered, but not deception. The boy tugged at her sleeve again. "Mom." She finally looked down at him. "What can we go?" His voice was small, tired. The tension in the room had reached him now. Marissa closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "You told me he wanted a family," she said to me. "I told you he wanted honesty. You always acted so perfect." I shook my head slightly. "No, I acted committed." That word seemed to confuse her. Committed to what? To the truth. She stared at the envelope in my hand again, then back at the casket. For the first time, grief crossed her face. Not for Daniel, for the illusion she had built around him. "He said you refused to have children," she whispered. "I refused to humiliate him." The sentence settled slowly over the room. People understood now. I had carried Daniel's secret, protected his dignity, even after learning about the affair. That part surprised them most. "You knew," Marissa said suddenly. I didn't answer immediately. "Yes." Her breath caught. "You knew about us for a while, and you stayed." "Yes." Why I looked at the photograph beside the casket. The younger Daniel, the easier version of him. "Because love sometimes outlives respect," I said. Marissa stared at me like she was trying to understand a language she had never studied. "That's pathetic." Perhaps. But it was honest. Tom stepped forward again. "We should probably take this conversation somewhere else." He was right. Funeral homes are not built for confessions. But Marissa shook her head. No. Her voice was steady again, not confident, but stubborn. "You all think I'm the villain here." No one answered. The silence said enough. "I gave him a son," she said. Her voice softened when she looked down. "I built a life with him." I nodded slowly. "Yes." Then I added the part she hadn't considered. "But you built it on someone else's marriage." Her shoulders flinched. The room breathed in again. Marissa looked around, at the church women, at Daniel's cousins, at Tom, at Mark. Every face held the same quiet conclusion. The story she had brought into the room had changed shape, and she had lost control of it. "I deserve something," she said finally. Her voice had become small again, not demanding, just desperate. "For my son." I walked toward her then, not quickly, just steadily. The aisle between the pews felt longer than it had earlier. When I stopped in front of her, the boy looked up at me. His eyes were curious, not afraid. Children read people differently than adults do. I knelt slightly so I could see him properly. "This isn't your fault," I said gently. He nodded, like that answer made sense to him. Then I stood again and looked at Marissa. "You destroyed our friendship," I said quietly, "for jealousy." Her eyes filled with anger again. "And you destroyed my marriage." The room went still. "But that doesn't mean I'll destroy a child." Her face changed, confusion first, then disbelief. Because she still didn't understand the difference between punishment and justice. And the next thing I was about to say would finally make that difference clear. Marissa stared at me. Her eyes had lost their earlier sharpness. Now they held something closer to panic. "What do you mean?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, too quiet for someone who had arrived expecting victory. I stood in the center aisle, the envelope still in my hand. The room behind me felt heavy with attention. People weren't shifting anymore. They were listening. To be clear, I said calmly, "This situation is not your son's fault." The boy leaned his head against her shoulder again. His truck dangled loosely in his hand. Marissa frowned. "That doesn't change anything," she said. "It changes everything," I replied. Mark stepped forward slightly. "Evelyn is right," he said. "The child isn't responsible for any of this." Marissa nodded quickly. "Exactly." Which means, Mark continued carefully, "We should separate the child from the financial claims." Her head snapped toward him. "What does that mean?" Tom answered this time. "It means inheritance and insurance don't work the way you think they do." Marissa blinked. "I have Daniel's will." Tom held out his hand. "May I see it again?" She hesitated, but the room had shifted enough that refusing now would look worse. She handed him the page. Tom studied it for several seconds. Then he exhaled slowly. "This is Daniel's handwriting," he said. "I told you, but it's not legally binding." Her face went blank. "That's ridiculous. It's unsigned. It has his signature." "Yes," Tom said gently. "But there are no witnesses." The room murmured again. "That's not required. For casual notes, maybe, but not for estate transfers." Her breathing grew louder. "You're making this up." Mark shook his head. "No one's making anything up." Tom folded the paper carefully and handed it back. "This document has no legal power." Marissa stared at it. Then at me. "You knew that." "Yes. And you let me embarrass myself. I didn't interrupt you." Her voice rose again. "You humiliated me." I tilted my head slightly. "You stood up in a funeral home and called me an infertile maid." The room didn't need more explanation. Marissa's mouth opened again, closed again. She was running out of ground. "What about the insurance?" she said suddenly. Her voice had turned sharp again. "That's still half his." Tom shook his head. "No." Her eyes widened. "What insurance policies don't divide automatically? They follow the beneficiary." She looked from Tom to me, then back again. Daniel changed it. Tom shook his head again. "I checked 3 days ago." The words landed slowly. "Evelyn is the sole beneficiary." Her fingers tightened around the child. "That's impossible. It's standard," Tom said calmly. "Most married couples never change it." Her face drained again. "You're lying." Tom's expression remained patient. "I wish that were true." Marissa turned toward me. "You knew all this." "Yes. And you let me talk. I let you tell your story." She laughed suddenly. A thin, brittle sound. "You think you've won." I didn't answer. Winning wasn't the right word. Reality was simply settling into place. The boy had started whispering something to her. She shushed him without looking down. "What about the lake house?" she demanded. "That belongs to Daniel's family." Tom nodded slowly. "Yes, exactly. And it sits inside a marital trust." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means Daniel never owned it personally." Her shoulders dropped another inch. "It's protected property." The room felt different now. The earlier shock had turned into quiet clarity. People were no longer looking at me. They were watching her, the way crowds watch someone realize a mistake too late. Marissa's eyes darted around the room, looking for support, for sympathy, for anything. But the child in her arms was the only person still close enough to touch. "You're all protecting her," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "We're protecting the truth." Her lips trembled. "He loved me." I met her eyes. Maybe he did. The honesty surprised her. But love built on lies doesn't last. She looked toward the casket again. For the first time since she arrived, grief reached her face. Real grief, not performance. "He promised us everything," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "People promise many things," I said quietly. "But promises aren't contracts." The boy looked up at me again. His eyes were curious, almost calm. Children understand tone more than words. Marissa lowered her gaze slowly. "So I get nothing," she said. The question hung in the room. Not angry now. Just hollow. I thought for a moment. Then I answered carefully. "You get the truth." She laughed again. "But it sounded tired. That's worthless." I shook my head gently. "No. It's the only thing that lasts." She looked down at her son again, then back at me. "You think you're better than me?" "No. I think you were jealous." Her eyes hardened slightly. "And you destroyed a friendship to prove it." She didn't answer. Because that part was true. The room had become very quiet again. The confrontation had reached its natural end. But one piece of the story still remained. And it was the one thing that would decide what kind of woman I would be after everything Daniel had broken. Marissa stood very still. The energy that had carried her into the funeral home was gone now. The papers in her hand hung uselessly at her side. Her son had started whispering to her again. "Mom, I'm tired." His voice was soft, the kind of small voice that reminds a room what actually matters. Marissa shifted him slightly on her hip. For the first time since she arrived, she looked unsure of what to do next. Tom stepped closer to me, quietly. "Evelyn," he said, "there's still the question of what happens now." His voice was careful, not instructing, just acknowledging the moment. The room waited. Funerals turn into strange courtrooms when family and money collide. I looked at the boy again. He had Daniel's brown hair. But that didn't mean anything. Hair travels easily through bloodlines. Truth does not. Marissa followed my gaze. "You don't get to judge me," she said suddenly. Her voice had found a little strength again. "You had everything. I had a marriage. That's what I said." "No," I replied. "That's what you wanted." Her jaw tightened. "He chose me." I didn't argue. Perhaps he did. The words surprised her. "You admit that I admit he made choices. Then why are you standing there like the victim?" I took a slow breath. Because anger at this point would only help her. "I'm not standing here as a victim," I said quietly. "I'm standing here as the person who stayed." The room understood the difference immediately. Marissa looked away. The boy slid down from her arms and stood beside her legs. He pushed the toy truck slowly across the carpet. Back and forth. A soft plastic sound. Mark stepped forward again. "The estate process will move forward normally," he said. "The insurance policy will transfer to Evelyn." Marissa's eyes snapped toward him. "That money belongs to Daniel's son." "No," Mark said calmly. "It belongs to the beneficiary." Her face twisted slightly. "You're all so righteous." No one answered. Because outrage sounds weaker when it's the last thing someone has left. I walked a few steps closer. Not threatening. Just closing the distance. "Marissa," I said. She looked at me slowly. "You didn't just betray me." Her shoulders stiffened. "You betrayed yourself." She shook her head. "You're repeating that because it sounds noble." "No. I'm repeating it because it's true." The boy looked up again. "Mom." She didn't respond. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. "You were my friend for 20 years, I continued. "You sat in my kitchen. You stayed in my home. You knew what my marriage meant to me." Her lips trembled. "And you still chose jealousy. I chose love. You chose envy." The correction landed hard. People in the room shifted slightly. Marissa's shoulders sagged. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No. I think it makes me honest." Silence settled over the room again. But this time it felt lighter, because the truth had already done its work. The confrontation was almost finished. There was only one thing left to decide. What kind of person I wanted to be now. I bent slightly toward the boy. "What's your name?" I asked. He looked up cautiously. "Ethan." "That's a good name." He nodded. "Do you like the lake?" His eyes brightened slightly. "Yes. Do you fish?" He shook his head. "But I like boats." I smiled faintly. So did Daniel. Marissa watched the exchange carefully. Suspicious. "What are you doing?" she asked. I stood again. "I'm making something clear." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't owe us anything." "That's true. Then stop pretending you're generous." I shook my head. "This isn't about generosity." "Then what is it?" "It's about responsibility." She laughed bitterly. "Responsibility to who?" "To the only person here who didn't make a selfish choice." She followed my gaze down to Ethan. Her mouth opened slightly. "You're not serious." I looked at Tom. "Daniel's education account still exists, doesn't it?" Tom nodded slowly. Yes, it was never used. No. I looked back at Marissa. That account will transfer to Ethan. The room inhaled softly. Marissa blinked. You're giving him money? I'm giving him opportunity. She stared at me, confused, angry. Why? Because he didn't choose this. Her voice sharpened again. You think that fixes what happened? No. Then why do it? I met her eyes one last time, because someone in this story should act like an adult. The words landed with quiet weight. Marissa looked down at her son again, then back at me. Her expression had changed. Not grateful, not apologetic, just tired. You always thought you were better than me, she said. No, I just never wanted what you wanted. She didn't answer, because the room already understood what that meant. Jealousy had taken everything from her, and the truth had taken the rest. The funeral home emptied slowly after that. People moved quietly, speaking in low voices. Not because they were afraid, because the story had already exhausted itself. There was nothing left to add. Tom stayed behind with Mark, speaking with the funeral director near the back of the room. The pastor shook my hand before leaving. Grace under pressure, he said softly. I nodded. It didn't feel like grace. It felt like survival. Marissa remained near the last row of chairs. Ethan sat beside her, now pushing the toy truck along the wooden edge of the pew. The room smelled faintly of lilies and furniture polish. For the first time all afternoon, the tension had lifted. Marissa looked smaller in the quiet. Not defeated exactly, but stripped of the performance she had carried into the room. I walked toward the front of the chapel one last time. Daniel's photograph was still there. That same old picture from the lake dock. I studied it for a moment. The version of him frozen in that frame had been easier to love. Memory does that. It edits. It smooths edges. It leaves out the lies. I removed my wedding ring. Slowly. The metal slid free with surprising ease. I placed it beside the photograph. Not as a punishment, just as an ending. Behind me, I heard Marissa stand. Her footsteps approached cautiously. You really meant that she asked. I didn't turn immediately. Yes. The education account. You think money makes you noble. No, I said quietly. I think choices do. She folded her arms. You're still judging me. I'm describing what happened. Her voice sharpened again. You had everything. I had a marriage that ended in betrayal. That's still more than I had. I turned then. You had a friendship. The words stopped her. You threw that away. She looked down at Ethan again. He promised me a life. And you believed him. Yes. I nodded slowly. That's the difference between us. What difference I never believed promises. Her expression tightened. That's a sad way to live. It's an honest one. Ethan tugged on her sleeve. Mom, what can we go home now? She looked down at him, then back at me. The anger in her face had softened into something else. Fatigue, maybe regret. I thought you'd destroy me today, she said quietly. That would have been easier. Then why didn't you? I glanced once more toward Daniel's photograph, then back at her. Because you already did that yourself. She didn't argue. For the first time all afternoon, she didn't try to defend herself. Some truths don't require explanation. They just settle. Marissa nodded once, then took Ethan's hand. He waved the toy truck at me as they turned toward the door. A small goodbye. Children move forward faster than adults. When the door closed behind them, the chapel finally felt empty. Tom approached slowly. You handled that well, he said. I handled it honestly. That's harder. Mark joined us, holding the envelope with the medical report. What do you want me to do with this? He asked. I thought for a moment. Then I took it. The paper had protected me today, but it had also protected Daniel once, even if he never knew. "I'll keep it," I said. Tom nodded. "Evelyn," he said. After a moment, "What happens next?" I looked toward the windows. Late afternoon sunlight had started to push through the glass. Soft. Quiet. "Next," I said, "I go home." The lake house waited. Not as a prize, just as a place where the water stayed calm, even when people didn't. That evening, I drove there alone. The road along the shoreline was empty. The lake looked exactly the same as it always had. Still, unbothered by human drama. I unlocked the door. The house smelled faintly of pine and old wood. Familiar. Safe. I walked out onto the dock. The water moved gently against the boards. Small waves, nothing dramatic, just steady motion. I thought about Marissa, about jealousy, about the years we had shared before either of us knew how fragile loyalty could be. Envy had taken everything from her, but the truth had given me something back: clarity and peace. If you're listening to this story and you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, remember something important. Jealousy destroys more lives than honesty ever will. But dignity has a quiet strength. You don't have to scream to stand up for yourself. Sometimes the strongest response is simply telling the truth and letting it speak for itself. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on the people you trust. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, betrayal, and the quiet ways people reclaim their lives, consider following along. Because sometimes the most powerful endings begin with the calm decision to walk forward,